here we are again. It's another one of my conversations that I hold on Mondays and Thursdays here in Zoom land. Today, my guest is Johnny Edward. Johnny's photographer, creative director, and all-around interesting person, as you can see here. So let me introduce to you Johnny Edward.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me on the program. I've loved all of your chats so far, and it's an honor
Thanks.
to be here having a conversation with all of you right now.
So you call yourself a visual storyteller. What does that mean?
Um, I'm sure part of it is a little bit marketing shtick, but on the artistic side of things, I think for me, the term photographer has become so broad in that, anyone who has a camera, which is to say everyone, pretty much calls themselves a photographer. And I think there are people who just take photos, and then I think there are people who create photos.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was a differentiator. I'm very driven by narratives, regardless of who steps in front of my lens, whether that's commercial work or an individual who comes to me and commissions me for fine art portraiture. I always want to try and convey a story in the images that I'm creating. And I always want to tell the story of whomever is in front of my lens, whether that story is about who they truly are as an individual or who they want to be, or a fabrication for an editorial narrative. That's really what drives me and motivates me and ultimately fulfills me as a photographer and artist in this medium.
Yeah, so how do you tell a story in a frame?
It's an esoteric kind of thing. I think it's something that we could talk about endlessly. Well, funny enough, you just brought up Dan Winters before we started
Mm-hmm.
recording here. And I think, someone like Dan Winters is a prime example of an individual who tells, novellas, encyclopedias worth through his work, through those single frames. To me, what it really comes down to ultimately is obviously there's, the production elements, there's the set, there's what's happening visually, how that's going to be interpreted. But more than anything else, it's how you're connecting with the person who's in front of your lens.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that connection ultimately determines whether the person is going to be able to be authentic and engaging and emotive. And you could have all of these other elements at place within that frame, but if there's not that connection, and if that person's not vulnerable and open and receptive to what's being done, then everything else is going to fall flat. So I think that it's a very multi-dimensional kind of equation, but it definitely starts with connection to the individual first and
Sure,
foremost.
sure. So let's talk a bit about style. Everyone is out trying to find their style, but is that how it works? Do you go after it or does it find you?
I kind of like to think about it in the most cliche sense in terms of love, where it's that bit where, oh, if you're looking for love, you'll never find it. When you
Mm-hmm.
stop, it finds you. And I think there is some truth to that. I think when you're so concerned with trying to find your style, especially initially, let's say you've picked up a camera or you switch genres or whatever that might be, you're not taking time to experiment. You're not taking time to find out what's important to you. So you're not establishing those foundational bases of what your style is actually going to emerge from. So I think the pursuit of that very thing, paradoxically, can prevent an individual or a burgeoning artist from finding it. And it's once again, I wish I could say, hey, if you take 10 steps forward and then cluck like a chicken and then, take 2 shots of espresso, you'll get there. I wish that there was an outright equation for how we find ourselves. But I think that it has to happen organically. And for some people, that process is very efficient. And for some people, that process is very long-winded. But I don't think it's something that you can necessarily reach out and grasp. You can, point yourself in the direction, but in terms of destination time, that's a bit more, it's out in the air, so to speak, or in the ether.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we even recognize ourselves when we've found our style or when it's found us.
And I think that's a hard thing. And then even if you find a style, how long do you feel good about it? At
Mm-hmm.
what point, when people start recognizing you for one thing? I kind of fell into fashion photography, and then suddenly people started calling me a fashion photographer. And at first I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm a fashion photographer. Hi, I'm Johnny. I'm a fashion photographer. And it became this thing where it was an identifier. But as my art has evolved, I feel like I've almost been not been, I've allowed myself to be pigeonholed into that genre because so much of what I'm doing now is outside of the realm of fashion, but that's still how I established myself. So I think there's a cautionary tale in that as well, to say, once labels are there, you essentially have to unlabel yourself in order to move in other directions or to be perceived in different ways, because we all tend to encapsulate each other. And as soon as someone hears the word fashion, assumptions are made. I have individual clients reach out to me often and they're like, hey, Johnny, I know you are a fashion photographer, but I'm just an individual who wants great photos and I love your style. You probably would never do this, but so even in terms of clients, that has become somewhat of a barrier if you look at that subsect of individuals. So it's all just very, very odd, to be completely honest, to me at least.
Yes, yes. For those who haven't joined us before, I mean, this is an open conversation. Feel free to unmute and ask questions. You can post things in the chat or you can ask them out loud. I want everyone to be involved here.
I don't have a question. I want to point something out.
Sure.
Johnny, you have
Yes.
colors today. What's going on with you?
You know, we just had that conversation. I told John this is my first time streaming or interviewing in color, and it's specifically for John. So
There you go.
that was my gift to John for his fantastic program, was to be, you know, modernized here.
Wow.
Interesting.
So let's talk about some of your influences. When I look at some of your work and your lighting, I think Irving Penn, maybe a little Richard Avedon, but also some painters. But then you separate yourself from them and you go on your own way. Who do you feel you've been influenced by?
Irving Penn is massive for me. So I think that's very insightful to see that, you know, not only in his lighting style, but in his connection, the breadth of his work, and just how driven he was. You know, the stuff that people often didn't see. And you talked about seeing, you know, his retrospective at the Met. And it's so vast, and he was such an impassioned creator that he is absolutely a massive influence for me. You know, I think there's other photographers who I consider legends who have influenced me, maybe not in as overt a way. On the fashion side of things, I automatically go to Paolo Roversi and, you know, his use of light, especially these dreamscapes that he creates with, you know, simple torches, mag lights and things like that. It's mind bending to me what he's able to do with light and how he essentially feels his way through the process. You know, I can go to people like Leibowitz, of course. And I really love her old work when she was first burgeoning. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I don't want to see, you know, Dennis Rodman, you know, doing his thing with Madonna or whatever. But it's when she was first starting out, I love her initial work when she was photographing her family. And it was just this idea of, I am involved in the world. I want to capture these moments that are fleeting, and I want to capture what's important for me. And then she carried that level of commitment into her work when she was photographing people beyond her individual circle. But, you know, at the same time, yes, I'm absolutely influenced by, you know, the great masters of painting from the Baroque and Renaissance period, the great Danish masters. I'm a fan of more than anything else, impassioned artists. And Simon and I recently had a chat, and, you know, I mentioned that there as well. You know, I find inspiration even in the small groups that we have on Facebook, and I'm influenced by people's work there too. But I would say, you know, the overriding people are definitely Roversi. Avedon is absolutely there. Mapplethorpe is there, just in terms of experimentation, and a few other people like that. So in that regard, you know, I probably have more fashion oriented influences in the photographic realm than not. And for me, that's just because, at least in times prior, there was a lot more experimentation that happened in fashion. People were pushing the boundaries. People were getting, you know, weird with it, so to speak. And there was this idea of separation, where in fashion, you need to be your individual self, your unique self, because it's such a cutthroat business. And, you know, there's so much technical mastery and proficiency that you have to move beyond that almost mastery of your craft to individual mastery of the craft. And that's something that I've always admired about fashion, especially going back to the, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That era was just mind bending in terms of what people were doing with what was available to them.
Yeah, I was lucky. Last year I was in Scotland for a week, and I stopped in one of their portrait galleries, and they had Francesca Woodman and Robert Mapplethorpe self-portrait exhibit there. It was really interesting to go in and see.
I'm sure that was brilliant.
Yeah. Do you do environmental portraits, or are you mostly studio lit, or?
So it's interesting. I love environmental work. I love location work. I love outdoor work. I love mixing artificial light with ambient light. My commercial work, the stuff that was actually paying the bills, I started to gain a strong foothold in my studio aesthetic. And so that's what a large portion of the body of my work that's out there right now in the social realm and on my website are, simply because obviously I'm trying to speak to a specific audience who's going to allow me to maintain my studio, pay my bills, buy floral blazers, you know, essentially maintain my lifestyle. So I love the challenge of environmental work. I think that it adds a lot of variability. And for me, that variability, I guess, puts me at my best. If I'm not being challenged, I don't feel like my work is top notch because I don't feel that impetus to have to meet those challenges. And that's kind of a strange thing. But Simon and I were talking about that. I recently started delving into video,
Hmm.
and it's been fun just because I opened up Adobe Premiere and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And, you know, it's so bewildering. But for me, that was exciting because I'm like, wow, here's this whole new thing to learn. And, you know, just having to get used to a new interface, you become so familiar. You put me in Photoshop or Capture One or something like that, and I could do it with my eyes closed. So to literally have to Google how to do the most basic thing, I mean, it was a little bit mind numbing in a way, but it was
Hmm.
also really enthralling because it felt like this whole new world of possibilities and the challenges and, you know, ultimately you know, the challenges that come with that, and then being able to overcome those challenges, which is a massive point of fulfillment for me.
Yeah, so video's changed over the past few years. I mean, it used to be a really time-consuming thing to work on something and let it render overnight, and I just really never got into video at the beginning. But now I'm starting to, at least to edit these conversations. I'm learning more about video editing. So I'm just doing them in iMovie right now.
Nice.
Uh, Education. What do you think is missing in education today?
You know, I think that there is an extremely strong focus to the point of being exclusionary on technical skill. And we can talk about business as well. I mean, you know,
Hmm.
there's courses on obviously SEO and great communities for that. Outside of a few small circles that I think are somewhat limited in appeal in terms of the demographics that they're appealing to, I don't think that there's enough focus on the individual, on the artist, on how you organically develop, on how you get out of your own way, on how you start to feel good about the work that you produce. And I think part of that is because those subjects are not as tangible. If I
Hmm.
go, okay, John, I'm going to teach you Rembrandt lighting. Here's how you position it. You position your light and you go, hey, I did Rembrandt light. And you get, you know, essentially that pat on the back to go, I did
Right.
it and I did a good job. If we're talking about development or evolution as an individual or as an artist, you know, what are the biomarkers for that? How do
Hmm.
we say, oh, well, I've developed 10%, 15%, 20%. So it's a much harder thing to track. And thus it's a much harder thing to market. But there's so many people out there right now who I've seen develop tremendously as artists who are producing work that for me is inspiring and show stopping in some cases. Yet when I have personal conversations with them, they go, you know, I'm just depressed. I'm not feeling good about what I'm creating. I don't know what this is. I don't know this. I don't know that. So that they're floundering
Hmm.
internally while it looks like they're succeeding externally. And I think that disparity, especially in the respective marketplace of today, societally, politically, socially, is a tragedy. And it leads a lot of people to either give up or to pursue paths that aren't good for them because they really haven't connected with themselves on a deeper level.
Yeah, I don't know when you got started in here, but for me, it was in the 70s and 80s. And there was little education then, and now there might be too much education. You know,
Absolutely.
everyone tells you how to do what they do now. When I started, people didn't share. I mean, you just had to look at pictures and work it out from there. So when I'm teaching now, I am heavy on the technical because I want people to understand that, but I try to teach them how and why, not what I do. Um,
Well, and that's tremendous. And I also think that we need to learn to be critical and accountable to our own work. So
mhm.
often, you know, people will jump into a group or go into a forum or let's say enter a print into a competition, and it's what does everyone else think? What do you think? What do you think about this, Johnny? What do you think about this, John? What do you think about this, Ken? What do you think about this, Cat? And to step back, you know, my first question always is, what do you think about it? What
Exactly.
do you think about the lighting? Well, I don't really like it. Why? Okay. And it's, you know, funny enough, I think there's a parallel in photography or in any inquisitive type endeavor to psychotherapy, where in psychotherapy, you go to a therapist, but ultimately they're leading you to your own answers. They are there purely as a conduit for you to connect with yourself so that you can go, oh, well, this is what really drives me. This is what's been holding me back. So I think that there is so much external that sometimes the internal aspect is left. And it's, you know, even if I put a piece of work out there right now and all of you were like, Johnny, this is tremendous, but I didn't feel good about that. I can outwardly go, oh, that's great, and share it and feel good about it and yada, yada, yada. But when I'm by myself, in my studio and I'm surrounded by my work, like what does that really do for me? How does that push me forward? And if I'm not being authentic, then the world's not receiving my art in its truest form. And I think that's a tragedy as well, because the world is a pretty ugly, destructive, corrosive place at times. And so I think all of us as artists are playing our respective part in essentially, beautifying the ruins, so to speak. And if you're not doing that authentically, it's a little bit heartbreaking to me, at least.
Yeah, authentic's a strong word. How do you go about being authentic? I'm thinking even in your photos, I mean, I don't think you retouch a lot.
I I don't. And Kat and I were just having this conversation earlier. It's really funny. I'm constantly in this place of flux with my editing workflow and my post processing workflow, because there is what I feel good about, and then there is what I feel others will feel good about, or how it will be received. And I once again, I think that authenticity is a really hard thing. I constantly ask myself, is this fulfilling to me? Is this a driving force? And as weird as it is, I try to dissociate myself from my work, because we all have perspective bias. Like the way that we view our work, others don't view our work. It's inherent, and we tend to be harder on ourselves in all aspects of our lives, not just art. So I try to detach from my work and then look at it and say, okay, if someone else created this, let's hypothetically say if Simon created this, how would I view it? What would it say to me? And those types of things. And then I just try and figure out if what it's saying from that perspective resonates with me. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if my work makes me feel good, numbers and commercial gigs and everything else be damned. There's a lot easier ways to make money, and there's a lot easier ways to find success in this world than photography and art. So if it's not doing something significant for me, my energy is best spent elsewhere. So I think it's just that perpetual pursuit, and understanding that authentic today for you is not going to be authentic tomorrow for you. And that's a hard thing too, because going back to it, it's easy to get known for something, and then it no longer drives you as an individual, but you keep doing it because you go, oh, what if I experiment? It's groups, am I going to lose my fan base? Are people going to think that my work is crap now? Like all of these internal questions that are so self-limiting. So I really think that it just starts with us individually, what our work's doing for us and what it's saying to us. And then from there, we release it into the world, and, it kind of takes on a life of its own at that point. It's no longer, within our grasp to shape or mold. It's all about interpretation and perspective at that point.
Sure, you have to allow yourself to change. I mean, even outside of photography and relationships, I have people who say, why are you doing this now? 10 years ago you said this. Well, 10 years ago I was a different person. 10 minutes ago I was a different person. I'm going to change my mind once in a while. I'm going to grow. So,
and I think that's really a sign of emotional maturity, is that very thing too, being able to shift gears and being able to do it with some level of certainty. There's just a very weird kind of interplay, I think, between expectation and personal fulfillment, where so often we avoid doing things that are personally fulfilling to us because we feel we will either fail to meet expectation, or that it will represent something to someone else. Even though life is ultimately this individual journey that we share with others, so rarely do we actually service ourselves as individuals. So often do we put others in front of us, and we do it in a way that honestly is disparaging to those people as well, because most of the times the narratives we create in terms of, well, John's not going to like this photo, that's probably not even the case. I'm just being assumptive and projecting that onto you, and then living my life based on that projection. So it's very damaging on both sides of that coin. And it's something that I think is just part of the human experience, to be honest. Even more so with artists, just because they tend to be more driven, more introspective, more passionate, and just more concerned with that level of connection that art provides.
We're not really about gear here, but I did see you post an RB67 or an RZ67 photo the other day. So are you getting into film?
It was the RB. Yeah, I'm getting back into film.
Okay.
So, I started with film, and there's definitely been a reconnection for me. There's a cool little place out here in Denver where you can, they have darkroom setups, a few different darkrooms and stuff. So I'm getting back to shooting and developing my own film. For me, it's really, really good. Number one, I love the aesthetic of film. We're not going to get a whole film versus digital thing. I think is kind of silly. Like, use the right tool for the right job, use what you want to use. but there's a romantic aspect to film to have, you know, a physical medium and then the interplay with light in a box, and that's it. You know, no intermediary, so to speak, in terms of a digital intermediary, but more so, you know, not to get lost on gear here for a moment, but like the camera that I switched over to, I shot Pentax forever, which started with a K1000 many moons ago.
Perfectly fine.
And evolved to a K1 eventually. So I just stayed with the Ks. But I moved over to Sony. So now I'm shooting the Sony A7R4, and the camera is just a technological marvel. I mean, it's brilliant. But I remember when I first tested it, when Sony sent it to me, I was actually on assignment with Kat in New York. And we were shooting, and I was just playing around shooting street. I'm shooting this camera at 1.4, like off my shoulder, just taking shots. And it's not to say that the compositions were good, but technically the dynamic range is so good and the autofocus is so good that I didn't even have to look at the camera to get what most people would consider to be a good photo. And so then going back to film, especially with medium format, especially with that RB, which, you know, is bigger than my damn head, and just all of the things that are involved with that, it causes me to slow down. I literally have to give myself to the moment, and I have to consider everything.
And it's a total opposite from a silent camera.
Exactly, that thing. And it's really funny. For a quick story on that, I got brought on to do lighting design for a fashion film a ways back, and I just wanted to shoot some stills in between with the RB. And most of the people who were there were significantly younger than me. And when I first fired that, the shutter obviously slapped, and everyone went, "Oh shit, what was that?" And so was like, "Did your camera just break?" I'm like, "No, that's what it actually sounds like." Thunderous.
Kerchunk, kerchunk, flips.
But you know, and I think once again, I also just think it's important, regardless, to push ourselves. You know, if you're a people photographer, if you're a portrait photographer, try architecture, try nature, try fashion. If you're, you know, just stepping outside of our comfort zone, it's far too easy to get comfortable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with comfort, but I think that comfort can quickly lead to apathy and indifference. And when you start to become apathetic or indifferent about what you're creating becomes subpar relative to what you're capable of creating.
Sure. And in the past couple of months with this COVID corona stuff going around, I mean, I didn't have many people at all, or any people come in. Like I had 12 cancellations, I think, the week of March 14th, and nothing since then. So I went out and started photographing buildings and flowers and taking cameras on my walks and just doing different things. I was telling people, you know, I'm out stealing the souls of flowers for these months.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Please.
When you're talking about, are you talking about RV? What is that?
RB.
Or am I not hearing it right?
RB67. It's an old Mamiya film camera.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Go grab it.
This is an RB67 for those of you who haven't seen it. You know, late 60s, early 70s medium format camera from Mamiya, and it's just a beast. It waist level viewfinder. You know, I'm a pretty strong guy, but this is taxing to hold this thing. And it's a tank. It's purely mechanical. There are no electronics in it whatsoever. And yeah,
use the shutter.
Okay, Ken, shut up, you. Wait, got this thing rotated, and so I don't know if that came through.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's
and then the advance.
Yep, and then you advance here at the shutter, and then you advance.
And flip the mirror.
Yep. Here. And then the cool thing about this is the reason it's called RB is because it has a rotating back. So trying to turn this thing to shoot in portrait orientation would be a monster. So all that you have to do is rotate the back, and it changes the orientation of your frame, which is pretty nifty.
Yeah, so even with digital, though, I try to think in terms of film. I've joked with people for the past few years that if I can't finish my photo in Lightroom or Capture One, I failed as a photographer. I need to open Photoshop. I did something basically wrong.
You know, and I think, to be honest, I feel similarly. It's funny, Kat and I literally just had this conversation earlier about my feelings regarding that. And I think it's hard. Like, I would like to express that opinion more, but it's a very polarizing topic, you know, especially in our photographic community. It's, well, you know, if you spent 5 minutes in Photoshop, then it's digital art and it's not a photo. Like, who gets to decide where that line is drawn? I think that all of us should do whatever makes us happy. You know, if you love taking a plated photo in the studio and compositing it with 100 other elements, that's art.
Great.
If you love just editing something in Lightroom or Capture One, that's art. So I think there's just so much judgment and division for the silliest things. You know, and let's just judge things on the merit of the end product rather than the process to get to that product. And, you know, it was actually in Dan Winter's book, The Road to Seeing. He was talking about speaking with a mentor. And at that point, you know, he was doing, a lot of people obviously don't realize retouching was done with film, you know, but he was editing his photos in the darkroom, and he went to his mentor and he said, you know, are these photos, is this wrong? Is it real? And he's like, Dan, we're going to look at the end product, and it's either good or it's not. It's real or it's not. And the process is almost irrelevant. And I love that. And I've always kind of like tried to stick to that. So I don't judge other people's work and process. I just know what works for me and what makes me feel good. And I'm of a similar ilk as you. You know, I think it's far too easy. And it's actually funny because I've gotten notes on my work sometimes, and it's like, bro, your work is so clean. Bro, that shot's so clean. It's so clean. And it almost kind of like gives me the willies to hear the word clean, because I feel like if I polish this photo so much, where the main descriptor for it is clean. And I get that there's, you know, lighting elements, and I'm very obsessed with my lighting, of course, but yeah, where we draw the line with that. And it's a very individual thing, but I'm, you know, I want to retain some organic feel to what I create.
Well, I have a friend in New York who still makes her living spotting prints.
Really?
Yes, for galleries and photographers. Yeah,
That is,
yeah.
that you want to talk about a lost art form.
Yeah, so it's still out there.
Yeah,
You
that's
brought up
brilliant.
something there that I ask a lot of people. Is photography a process or a product? Which one, if you had to choose one?
Oh, a process, absolutely.
Definitely, me
No.
too.
Yeah, and I'm so driven by being behind the camera. I'm so driven by the experience. I'm so driven by that connection. When I do engage in fashion work or commercial work, I'm so driven by the people that I'm able to collaborate with. You know, you get to work with these amazing teams, and everyone's so energetic and impassioned and working together to create this. Like, for me, it's that. And a lot of times I could take that process and leave the imagery. And it's not to say that I don't want to create that imagery, but it is that journey of getting to the end point that for me makes me feel fulfilled and inspires me. If I could just close my eyes and then manufacture, you know, a great image, it'd be all well and good to throw it out there, you know, into the world, so to speak, but I wouldn't feel good. It really wouldn't have any relevance or significance to me.
Right, the photo's a byproduct of what we go through.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that gets lost even when we're talking about how to make money as photographers, you know, which obviously comes up a lot. How do I transition into this? And it's ultimately, you know, let's say you're working with an individual client. They're going to look at the photo that you create, whether that's a digital photo or a print, and they're going to reflect on the experience that you created for them. And that's why there are a lot of, who I personally know, and I would even say names because they know they're terrible, but there are a lot of photographers who are really not good, who are in my circle, who make great money because they're really great people. You know, they provide great experiences, and actually we're engaging in a sort of perspective bias in that, because if you're photographing a family and the kids were laughing and everyone had a good time, even if the highlights are blown out, even if the framing is bad, even if there's, you know, just all of these elements that make it less than, that family is going to look at that photograph and think about being together and loving each other, and they're going to love it. You know, conversely, you could go out with the whole production team and produce something that could be on, you know, Ellen Chrome's landing page, the most Vogue family ever. And if you were, you know, a prick during the time, and if no one had a good time, they're going to look at the photo and go, ugh, that's subpar. So, you know, even on the side of consumption, when we're working with people, so much of it is defined by what that experience is like and what that journey looks like. And obviously it's different if you're on a, you know, creative brief and it's commercial work, because at that point, the end point really is all that matters. But yeah, I think that's another oft forgot about thing. What is that experience like, both for us as the creators and both, and so, you know, concomitantly for those we're creating with or for.
Right, they say people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely. It's, once
out
again,
of
all of these tropes are there for a reason. They're said over and over again because they're true and they defy time.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the mirrorless thing a little bit, because I've recently been doing a lot of mirrorless. I almost always am on a tripod. I have Parkinson's, so I have a bit of shake, and the tripod helps there too. But Now it's having the mirrorless. I treat it almost like I treat my 4x5. I don't have my head up against the camera talking into it so that because you can't hear me, you can't see me, so I can be on the side and interact with people and just have the shutter release and really enjoy it and get more into the involvement with the person. I don't know if you've going in that direction.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely freed me up, you know, especially when I'm shooting outside. Like going back to Pentax for a second, I love those cameras. Like I basically built my career with the K1, and most people don't know it was the same sensor that was in the D810. So really great sensor, really, I mean, great color rendition, all of these things. Like technically that camera was great. The autofocus system was from the Stone Age. I mean, my Mamiya that doesn't have autofocus has a better autofocus system than that Pentax, right? So I was always so concerned, especially when I was shooting in backlit situations or when I wasn't using my strobes, about hitting focus to the extent where I couldn't connect with people on the same level because those technical nuances were obsessing me, because I went, well, if I get home and I shot 50 frames or 100 frames and all of those frames are out of focus, then I failed to do my job. So with the mirrorless, I feel so certain in what I'm shooting and so certain in the capabilities of the camera that, like you, it frees me up to be more involved with the process and with the people that are part of that process than the obsession on what's going on with my camera, how it's functioning or malfunctioning, and all of those types of variables.
Great. Have you been in the business long enough to know Polaroid Type 55?
No, actually.
Oh, that would get me right back into film immediately. That was the peel apart 4x5 Polaroid film. There's a positive and a negative.
Well, you know, it's really curious with that too. Going back to film, I had a friend reach out to me recently when he saw that photo of the RB, you know, and he asked, well, are you shooting black and white or color? And I'm like, well, I'm shooting both. And we had to talk about it. You know, he only shoots black and white now because all of the color films that he loved aren't made anymore. So there's that kind of transient nature to film, which I think also makes it kind of beautiful in its own right. You know, I mean, ultimately, not to get too poetic here, but we're all transient. We're all ephemeral. We're all kind of coming and going, and we don't get a say in that. So to have that art form and to know, okay, this film stock that I'm using, this might not exist in a month. They might shut down production. It's almost more of an impetus. It focuses me even that much more because we're honoring and working with something that is just passing through in a way that I don't think we can really speak of, you know, in terms of digital cameras and sensors and that type of thing.
Have you had a chance, or do you know of the film Jay Myself about Jay Mizell?
I know of it. I haven't had a chance to consume it yet.
Watch that sometime. I watched it again this week with the film director. Had a Q&A. One of the scenes in there is he opens a closet drawer and he's got like a dozen bricks of Kodachrome 25 from 1975 still in the plastic wrap. You know, it just calls it Kodak's Revenge. It's crazy.
Well, and I think that's it. You know, there's this idea of preservation that comes with photography. Ultimately, you know, I want to say it was Arbus. I'm probably going to butcher this quote, but you know, Susan Sontag, she basically said that, you know, we participate in memento mori when we photograph people because it's a reminder that that moment will never come again, and those moments are constantly ticking away. And I spoke about this on another program, but that's a really big catalyst for my work, you know, is wanting to honor these moments that I get to spend with people, you know, in people's journeys, because those moments that I spend with them will never happen again. And those moments are lost to the ages. And then being able to essentially hang on to those moments tangibly through these photographs, through these prints, to me is very, very significant in a way that's almost hard to articulate. But that's definitely a big part of the driving force behind my work on a deeper level.
So how did you handle the isolation of the past few months? Did you get into more self-portraits?
Well, you know,
that's something both of us do.
I did, purely out of, you know, this almost going mad. At first I was like, this is great, because most people know me as being very jovial, but I'm kind of like a cross between being very outward and very introverted and introspective. So for the first week I was like, oh man, this is great. I don't have to show up anywhere. You know, if someone hits me up, I don't have to get back to them because I'm just like COVID. And so it became this blanket to literally isolate in a way and just sit around and eat pizza and watch bad TV. Like, it was phenomenal. And then I started getting this creative itch, and it started coming up. And normally, you know, I have a cadre of folks that I could call at moment's notice and say, hey, let's go out and create today. And then, yeah, we're there. And that wasn't happening. And so I started getting into my studio and shooting self-portraits and at home. And it was a really interesting experience for me, because going back to the driving forces behind our work, you know, normally I'm thinking, okay, this is the next publication I want to get into. This is the next brand I want to work with. It's a very pragmatic thought process about what I'm creating. And it's generally geared toward moving forward in my career as a professional, not necessarily fulfilling myself as an artist. And so it allowed me to step back, and I went in and I created some of these self-portraits, and I'm like, well, people are going to think these are weird. And I was like, I just don't give a shit. That's fine. Because it wasn't about people and it wasn't about an end product. It was purely about me. And that was very emboldening. You know, I walked away from that process of falling into those self-portraits, and I brought that forward into the work I'm now producing. I'm getting out more. I'm shooting more natural light editorials. So, you know, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not really concerned with how this is going to be received. I'm more concerned with how it's going to make me feel and how it's going to drive and empower me as an artist. So it was bad. The outgrowth of it ultimately is good, but the experience itself was very, very challenging. And I actually almost was caught in North Carolina going back to CAD. I was working with her on a project as the whole country started shutting down. I got trapped in Asheville, North Carolina for days because of fog. I was trapped in the Atlanta airport for 18 hours where there were literally two other people in one bar open. And I don't even want to talk about my bar tab in Atlanta. It was bad. But that was my experience starting it. And obviously, you know, there's still a lot of variables going on, but it was unprecedented. But I tried, like I do with most things, to use it in a positive way, and to take it as an opportunity to focus on my weak points as an artist and as a man and as an individual, which is easier said than done, of course.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the photo we used as the promo on this, on the Apple box, leaning forward.
Me too.
The lighting, the shading, everything about it was really fantastic.
Well, it's at some point here, I'm going to have to post the outtakes from that, because I had so many people reach out to me and they're like, oh man, you defied gravity. That's so fantastic. I'm like, if you saw how many bruises I had leaving that from falling and rolling out and the box slipping, I definitely broke an Apple box throwing it because I was so pissed off at one point. Like, you know, the reality was much different than the end product, but it was fun. You know, it was fun just doing something that was seemingly so simplistic. And funny enough, you know, I've received so much feedback on that photo, and so many people have reached out to me. And for me, it's just this kind of paradox, because going back to it, I created that solely for myself, and I put it out there. And obviously the image has a lot of technical and artistic merit, but I think it's also evident that I created it for myself on an almost intangible kind of level. So it's that reminder of, you know, what the driving forces for our work need to be, and how we need to stay rooted in our aesthetic and in that authenticity, whatever that might be in that moment.
Yeah, I think there's another shot maybe
John,
on
can I ask
your
a
website.
question?
Yeah, Joe.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of open-ended. Just curious, like, how do you see the boundary between your professional photography life and your personal life with or without photography? I mean, do you like say, okay, I'm done work and I don't want to bring a camera to this party, or I've walked down the street, I like to just always have the opportunity to make an image, or do you just see this part of how you experience the world day to day? Or is there a separation you like to keep, or do they, I don't know, I'm just wondering.
I think that is a tremendous question, to be honest. And I honestly don't think there's much of a distinction for me personally. You know, I definitely see the world in that regard. Even if I don't have a camera with me, I could be walking with a group of friends and I'll just stop and be, you know, looking for my phone because there's really great shadows on a wall or textures or whatever it might be. So I experience the life in a way almost as if I was looking through my lens. So for me, there's not a big separator. And that's hard. It's great on the artistic side of things for me because I love living in this state where I'm almost in awe by everything. It's like I'm in my home office right now and there's trees outside and some clouds. And I'm just like, oh, look how that cloud's socketing in between the trees. And it's beautiful. And that aspect of things is great. But when it comes to the work side of things, I have a really hard time shutting off with clients and with cues and with briefs and those types of things. So I'm I think I'm still working on finding a balance on the work side where I can shut off and go, okay, I'm done working, not, okay, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm on here trying to get something done. So it's challenging, but it's also wonderful. But yeah, I would definitely say for me, there's very little in the way of division. It's just one aggregate that at times is more enjoyable and at times less enjoyable.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sure,
you're
and
very welcome.
I was thinking of another photo, probably on your website, of you in the air with a, looks like a silverish Oliphant background. Is that another self-portrait?
Yeah, that was another
Sort of a
self-portrait.
ballet move?
Yep. And that was the funny thing. And, people are like, how did you do that? I'm like, well, I set a timer on my camera and it was on burst mode and I just kept jumping, and I kept falling and I kept doing this and I kept doing that. So it's patience. I think of Cartier-Bresson and, folks who were just monumental in starting the street movement and that idea of waiting for a moment.
Mhm.
And I still do shoot street too. And it's very similar to that where, you see this scene and it's like, wow, if someone would just walk through this scene, if I could just get a picture, and I've waited for hours for someone to just walk out of the shadow. And I think so much of what we do is waiting for that. Even when I'm working with clients, I'm waiting for someone to release. I'm
Mhm.
waiting for the smile that doesn't look like it's from a 5th grade school photo, but looks authentic, as if they were just complimented by someone they love. Like we're constantly in wait. And the better we get at waiting and the more we can keep our eyes open while waiting, the more receptive we become to those moments that are, significant amongst others.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. I know I often go out for my morning walks with my wife, and I joke that it's like walking a dog because if I have my camera with me, I got to stop every 30 feet and take a
And
picture of something.
People tolerate it or they don't.
Yeah,
And it's and I don't know. I don't know where the dividing line is with that. Like I do always want to have my camera with me, and then I go, I'm going to leave my camera at home, but I have a Google Pixel, and the camera on there is tremendous. And then I pull out my phone. So at the same time, it's great. Sometimes I will force myself to leave, my gear and my phone at home and just go on walks,
yeah,
just go into the world, just go to the museum or whatever. And it's nice to just essentially live in that transient moment and okay, there's nothing that I need to capture. There's nothing that I need to archive. I'm here solely to experience. So I do think it's important for us as photographers to put the gear down sometimes and just go, oh, I'm going to go out and, live life as if this wasn't such a big part of me. And it's nice. It's odd, but it's nice.
yeah. I call that going out and making neurochromes.
I like that.
Feel free to use that. Is there anything you want to say about your body art? You've got a few tattoos that people that don't know you here probably can't see right now because of.
Yeah, it's pretty much just one thing that's taken over the vast majority of my being. Well, it's funny, firstly, I forget about it.
Mhm.
I think it's one of those things that's white noise. And I was wearing, kind of like an A shirt, a tank top. This was before kind of COVID collapsed on into us. But I was out with a friend of mine and we were downtown Denver and I was walking around and I stopped and I was just, one of those days when you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, you're just not feeling great. And I had one of those and I asked him, I'm like, why are all of these people staring at me? What is going on? And he looked at me and he's like, man, you're wearing shorts and a tank top and 80% of your body is tattooed. What do you mean? Why are they looking at you? And I kind of laughed, but it had escaped me.
Mhm.
But, I grew up, my father was in a lot of biker gangs in Indiana and in Illinois. So I grew up around these biker guys, these big, burly, bearded guys who were covered in tattoos and, swilling whiskey and jumping on their bikes. And so they were these very legendary, larger life characters to me.
Mhm.
And it had an influence on me to the extent of when I was a little boy, I'd get those temporary tattoos out of like the quarter machines and just put them all the way up my arm onto my neck, much to the chagrin of my mother. So I think in a way it was kind of destined from that, but I've traveled a lot throughout the world. I've traveled to Bali and Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, all of these different places. And I've been very influenced by those cultures. My experiences in travel, and I'm also very driven by the mythologies that have emerged from those cultures in these different areas of the world. So a lot of the tattoos on my body are influenced by those areas, by those people, and by those experiences. So without ever engaging in any type of cultural misappropriation, in a way, a lot of the mythological elements in my tattooing is me manufacturing my own mythology. So, you know, it's a way for me to hang on to these things that are important. And I get asked a lot, well, you know, you got that tattoo when you're 25. What are you going to think when you're 45 or 55 or 75 or 85 if, you know, you make it that long? And I'm like, well, kind of like we talked about, you know, I'm not going to be the same person, but I still respect and love the person that I was in that moment. Yeah. So it's really a story. It's my story, and it's something that I get to wear, and it's just something that's important to me in a way for me to express myself. And, you know, it's a curious thing, but yeah, it's really funny because what I get asked a lot from, you know, friends who have conservative relatives or other friends is they're like, man, how has this affected your career? Like, you have all these tattoos and it's a big deal. And I'm like, honestly, it's created kind of a false equivalency for me that's worked in my favor, because if I'm working on a commercial project and let's say it's a traditional brand and I go in and I meet the executive, I walk in and their automatic assumption is, oh man, this guy has a lot of tattoos. He's definitely an artist. He's the guy that we want. Yeah, he's art. And so it's really funny. So for what I do, people assume that I'm an artist. And in my case, it's true, but it just as likely could not be. You know, I could be an accountant or a lumberjack, like you don't know, but it works. So yeah, it's been a funny thing. And there's still, as tattooed as I am, there's still a lot of skin to get tattooed yet. And there's plans for all of that. So wow. It's an ongoing process.
So I guess I have to ask, do you ride?
What's that?
Do you ride?
You know, I used to. I don't anymore. What happened was back in Florida, I was going out to bike week with some friends, and a semi cut across lanes without checking, and I lost quite a few of my friends in one swift accident. Wow. And after that happened, I've never been on a bike again outside of like dirt bikes, you know, but I just couldn't bring myself to it. And it's funny because I love, especially, you know, bobbers and cafe racers and all of these. And I actually have a friend out here who does custom fabrication, and he's offered to gift me a bike. And I'm like, wow, that's great. And I went over to his house and I got on it. And as soon as I sat on it, I just thought about that experience and those friends, and I just can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. So is Denver opening up now? Are you getting to get out more and do things? Or people come to you now?
It's slowly opening up. You know, I think it's like everywhere else in the United States. You have the people who are still staying in because they're cautious. And then you have the people who are going around, you know, just hugging strangers because they're throwing caution to the wind. Right. But yeah, things are slowly starting to get back to some semblance of normal, which is nice. You know, the gyms are going to be opening out here, which is great. That's a big thing for me for release. There's plans to slowly start opening the Contemporary Art Museum and the Botanic Gardens and things. And that was actually a really hard part for me with this too, in terms of the isolation. Like, I think I could have dealt with the isolation more if I could have been better engaged with the world. Like, I would have been fine being alone if I could have been alone at the museum or at the gardens or at all these places, but being alone in my apartment and then trying to be responsible and not go out to state parks that are a drive for me. So, you know, just that aspect of things for me, being able to engage with art and with the artistic community is big. And just being able to go out and get an espresso, honestly, has been liberating. You know, to actually walk out and get a coffee from somewhere that I don't have to make for myself has been quite a treat. So I guess in that way, it's given me a newfound appreciation for the little things in life.
Yeah, I mean, that's how this all came about. You know, a week or two into this being alone, it's, look, I know a lot of people I can talk to online. This Zoom thing seems really like fun. You know, let me get this free Zoom account, and then, okay, let's pay for the Zoom account and get more people in. And, you know, and it's growing. I mean, I've done, maybe 24 of these since it started.
Oh, they've been great. I've enjoyed them so much. Well, the funny thing was I was on the opposite side of that. You know, there was like Kat and Ken and David's in here, all these folks who were connected, like people were just connecting with each other, and it was these giant Zoom things. And I was getting invited left and right. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. And so I even further isolated myself by going, if I can't see people face to face, I'm not going to see people at all, you know, and dug my heels into the ground. And I honestly kind of regret that, because once I started jumping on these and not just doing interviews, but, you know, getting together with people, it's
just socializing.
Great. Yeah, it's huge just to be able to have a conversation. It's one of those things that I think we really take for granted. And I'm the type of person who will literally talk to folks who are in line with me at the grocery store. So,
sure,
you know, yeah. So for me, it's a big deal. So no,
Right.
it's
At Portrait Masters last year, I think you and I are competing to work in the photo booth because then everyone comes to us.
it's
You know, when,
true.
when I go to events, everyone says, "Well, why didn't you go there? Why didn't you go to that part? Why didn't you go?" Because if I stay here, people will find me. They'll come to me, and we'll have a real interaction. If I go out looking for things, I'm going to miss too much.
It's
So,
true. Yeah. There's definitely a lesson to be learned there to just be present as well,
Mhm.
which, is a thing unto itself.
Sure. So, how everyone else out there? Who else has some questions for Johnny?
I've got one.
Yeah.
Earlier in the conversation, you talked about kind of finding authenticity and finding stuff. Do we talk enough in photography about how inherently crazy making photography is? There's so many
No.
photographs we can choose to make.
No,
There's so many technologies that we're supposed to know. Oh, you're a photographer. You should know about that lens. Like, kind of? Or what's that setting on that camera?
Oh,
Or
that's the dreaded question. What's the settings? It's the settings
yeah.
that were appropriate at the time. It has nothing to do with the picture you're going to take tomorrow.
But photography is just kind of crazy making. And some of us seem to surf through that, and others of us sort of get lost in that. What photo am I supposed to make now? And then those photos go out to people who will never see them the way we do.
Mm.
And we get that feedback and like, well, I need to make this photograph good enough for groceries because I need to pay for my bills.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's madness. I think engaging in any art form is a career, is a money-making endeavor, is madness. And I think even more so in photography, because you're right, there are infinite possibilities. There are 1,000 different ways to do something. There are 1,000 different things to shoot in any point in time. And it's a really weird balancing act. So no, I do think it's madness. And I think what we do is pretty, ridiculous. And I don't think that's talked about enough. Sometimes it's just a little bit ludicrous what we do and how we do it and the reasons we do these things. And I think that at least this is just my personal opinion, but I think in all art, there is a tendency for the communities that represent that medium to aggrandize what's being done, because there is this lofty aspect. I mean, to be able to actually say in today's society, I am a professional artist, like it's kind of a cool thing. But I think the ego gets involved with that. And then it becomes, okay, well, let's only talk about the good stuff. Let's only talk about how, all of these things. So we leave out that other side of the conversation that's very much reality, not only to the world, but in our own communities. And then we're left to kind of flounder on our own and go, this can't just be me. It feels like it's just me, but this can't just be me. And then you get together in a group like this and you go, how many people think this? And everyone goes, oh yeah, twice a day, all the time. So I think that level of openness is really important. And I'd really like to see things move in that direction where we could just talk about the inane aspects of it, talk about the frustrating aspects of it, talk about the aspects of it that make us want to just sell our gear and never take another photo in our lives. Like those are all things we need to discuss as individuals and as a community. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. Well, I've seen too many people try to get into photography and then just go, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And and you find your way out of that through experimentation,
yes,
through discovery, or you go, God damn it, I'm going to go be a CPA because. Sure.
Well, I think I've had this conversation ad nauseum, but I think the other part is too, ultimately, I think most people learn by emulation. We emulate. We start off, it's the great masters of painting having apprentices. They start by copying and then slowly they work into their own aesthetic and into their own workflow. But so many people get stuck in that. We just keep copying, we keep regurgitating. And it's like, take Lindsay Adler, for instance. I love Lindsay, amazing educator, amazing photographer. And she has created this vast empire for education. But it's funny because I'll see photos that get put out there and I'm like, well, you didn't just learn from Lindsay, you created Lindsay's photos. And down to the minute detail. And so there's a lot of people who have become really good at replication, but really poor at creation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another part of it too. And part of that is because, like you just said, I think there's so many things to do that it's easier to just, draw the tree in front of you than to close your eyes and draw a tree from inside your mind, especially when there's so many variations on that tree that it's essentially endless. So that kind of paralysis by analysis leads to just saying, well, I have to do something, therefore I'm going to do this. And then, I mean, what really comes from that?
and there's money there. I remember being
Yeah.
in Europe and going through the great museums and seeing art majors copying Rembrandt, copying Picasso, and all this stuff to learn how to make those things to acquire those skills.
Yeah.
But then throughout the history of art, there's been like, well, I could do my own thing, which is new and different. People go, oh, that's new, that's different. Or I can sell a Rembrandt, and people like that. Oh, that's just like a painting that I've seen. That's good. It's in a museum. I'll buy that.
No,
And I think in photography, there's some of the same thing, is that I can go and be different, or I can sell stuff that people are comfortable with and will give me money for.
And I think you're absolutely right. You know, and one of the mindsets that I think it can be damaging with that personally, and this is certainly true for myself, is the either or mentality. You know, either I am this artist on the fringe who's scrounging and eating ramen, or I'm a sellout who does nothing but create these photos that are generic and I get paid and I can live well and drive a car. And, you know, I think that we can engage in those things depending on our model and aesthetic. We can engage in those business practices that allow us to pay the bills and still feed our artistic souls on the side. But I don't think that's something that happens very often, because people go, well, if I'm this, then I can't do that, or I'm not going to make time for this. So it's a very fine line to walk. But I think that, you know, you can leverage it. If people want to pay you money to take, you know, silly photos of, you know, cats, whatever, do that. But if you're not a cat person, then go and take pictures of your dogs, you know, dogs in the spare time. And I know that's a silly analogy, but, you know, it's no matter what, we have to do for ourselves. And whether that means setting aside time outside of our professional endeavors and doing it. And very similarly, you know, going back to the accountant analogy, there are accountants who are great photographers, and accounting is how they make money. And then they go and create these beautiful pieces on the side, just like there are, you know, senior portrait photographers who just do the generic, who then go and create these gorgeous fine art nudes. So I think we have to almost liberate ourselves from the idea that our artistic identity is defined by our professional identity, if that makes sense. And that's a weird thing.
I really like that. The frustration I have is that because we get labeled, and once you get labeled, you're a hack. That's hard to get away from. There's a science fiction author of years past that I like, Roger Zelazny, and he had kids. So some of what he wrote was, I have kids in college, I need to pay bills. They're not complicated stories, they're fun, they're romps. And then he would write other stuff that was art. But I have friends who are like, no, he's a hack. Everything he does is a hack. I'm like, no. He wrote fun romps, but he also wrote cool stuff. And I see that a little bit in photography of people go, well, I would like to do just easy stuff for the money, but I've got my brand. I need to be brand appropriate in this world.
I think Kat had do you have your hand up? Do you want to
Can I ask a question?
I've got all kinds of shit to say about this.
I'm going to take my hat off to hear this one talk.
Okay. So the first piece I want to address is like the education versus the art. There is so much education out there, right? Whether it's Portrait Masters or ProEDU or, you know, insert platform here. Mm-hmm. I think when you begin, right, like that emulation piece comes into play, so that you can just learn how to do. But all of those things are compounding. So when I learned this lighting style or just about light in general, right? And then, I learned something new about styling. You incorporate all of those pieces, and your personal brand, whether you're in business or otherwise, evolves into that. So saying that I have to be on brand for my work, you're shooting it. You are on brand. So there's a lot to be said there. And the fact that we all inevitably hit this wall and go, well, I can't sell that because that's not what people are hiring me for. Well, if you present it and you create it and do so in a way that you're in love with it, people will pay you to do it, and they'll pay you handsomely. So to have the expectation that you can't is a mindset issue. I wouldn't say that that is a matter of business at all. That's how you run your business, and lead by example. Yeah, sorry, I just get real mad about that.
No, and I would agree with you. I mean, when I first started shooting more what I would consider high-end fashion work, it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, no one in my market is gonna want this, and then people just came to me for it. I think it's hard for me personally because I know I can create marketable work even if it's on the fringe,
Sure.
but sometimes I just want to create, then the challenge for me becomes just creating without the idea of monetization in mind. To say, well, I'm not worried about how I'm going to package this. I'm not worried about how I'm going to dress this up. I'm not worried about the copy I'm going to use. I'm not worried about my intended audience. I'm not worried about niche this or genre that. I'm just doing it. And so then I think the driving forces, and I agree, don't get me wrong, I agree with everything that you're saying here. And I think it's just hard for me personally to step away from that. Okay, how am I going to essentially spin this into saying, well, I'm not going to spin this at all because that's not relevant to what I'm doing right now.
Well, and that's the beauty of it though, right? Like, and that's where the audience that does want to spend with you simply to work with you. So the price point almost becomes moot.
That's true.
When you're creating for the sake of creation and not to package it or throw it out there or, run it through the marketing funnel, right? But just to create and love, and then you share from that perspective. That's when the people that are wanting to hire you for your vision and not because they think you can do what they want you to do in a pretty way.
No, that's a really good distinction. I think that's very important. Yeah.
I mean, Bob popped a question into the chat. Bob, do you want to ask that yourself?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I can. You're good, Bob.
Good. Well, I was curious about, when you get hired to do commercial work, or regardless of who your client is, do they hire you because of your distinctive voice and your look? And then after they hire you, they say, well, wait, I don't like it that way. I want you to do this. Come on, the art directors and the agencies I worked for ad agencies for many years. They used to drive the art side of the business crazy because they hired him for a look. Like the art director would do a comp.
Yep.
And no, I want this guy because he's really good. Then they hire the guy, and then they say, wait a minute, I don't want you to do your own look. I want you to do the way I designed it.
I think,
yeah. You turn down those jobs?
I try to weed those out. And I think that's a really hard thing to do because sometimes, obviously, there's so many different gatekeepers. Sometimes the person who's making the decision to actually retain talent isn't the person who's going to be providing the feedback on the project itself, so there's that hierarchy, but it's absolutely still relevant and it's absolutely still prevalent in the industry. When I encounter those types of issues, I just try to have very open conversations and say, hey, listen, this is why you brought me on. If you want someone else to do it in the way that you're now supposing or inclined to have it done, I'm not the right person for that. But, even individual clients will try and micromanage sometimes. Like John had mentioned, my work is generally fairly hands-off editing. And I've had people receive photos and they're like, well, that was great, but can you edit it like this? And they show me an image and I'm like, no, I cannot. I'm like, I would rather bag groceries. I cannot do that. I'm sorry. That is just at odds with who I am as an individual, as an artist. No. And then, that discussion is to be had. But, I do think that for me at least, kind of with my overall person, people want to bring me on sometimes because it's almost faddish. I've had very conservative brands bring me on because they can shoot behind the scenes videos with me. And it's like, oh, look at this heavily tattooed, kind of weird, odd, atypical gentleman who we brought onto the project. Aren't we trendy? And then the reality of that working relationship is anything but pleasant. So I've done my best to try and keep away from those situations, but they definitely still occur. So, and it's never fun. And just like the talent, the artistic side, of the industry you were working in, it drives me batshit crazy. So I think it's something that's definitely carried forward. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've been on for an hour now. Is there any last minute things people want to ask? Or Johnny, do you have any last minute things you want to say?
I mean, we could open it up to questions first, and then if we have any time, I can make a statement, or I could just keep talking, whatever.
The pressing question that I had coming into this was how you did the anti-gravity shot, but you've covered that off pretty good. The other observation I'd have is that you talk very fluently and very rapidly, and I think if I knew you, I'd probably refer to you as Machine Gun Johnny.
I always, it's something I'm actively working on. I'm a very good presenter in front of people, but especially when I'm excited. Like if you had me talk about cabinetry, I could be very slow and methodical, and it would sound like I was on NPR, and I would be like, these are your different stain options. And I could go through that, but I love this community, and I love art and photography so much that it's hard for me to slow myself down when I'm excited. So I catch myself sometimes and I'm like, okay, I just spewed out 40 words in 2.5 seconds. That was gibberish. No one is going to be able to make sense of that. So I appreciate the reference regardless.
Well, what you've done, I think, is showing the kind of energy that you carry with you, and for me, it's been a great time listening to you.
Oh,
and I see certain names around here that I've seen in various places with their work. I feel like I'm a fish swimming in with the big sharks because I don't make my living from photography.
And there's a fish behind
fact,
you on the
I've
wall.
lived so long, I don't make much of a living anymore.
Well, and I think that's that distinction, this is a topic that could go on for another hour, but I think that's a hard part. I think we're all sharks. And to be honest, I think we're all fish swimming with sharks because all of us see ourselves as fish surrounded by sharks. And that's the perspective bias of that. But it's, the merit of what we create, I don't think is contingent upon, whether we're getting money or not, or what that level of money is. There's us as artists, and then there's us as professionals. And if we're just talking purely about business, of course, if, John's making 250 grand a year and I'm making 100, well, John is 150 grand better than me every year. But if we're talking about, yeah, I don't know. I'm actually under a bridge right now. That's where my setup's at, so we won't get into that.
Yeah.
But I then there's the aspect of what we're creating as artists and what it means to be a professional artist. And, I see professional more as passion and how much time we devote to what we're doing rather than just receiving compensation in exchange for what we produce. And there are a lot of people out there who are getting paid who are not producing art. And then there's a lot of people who are producing stunning work who aren't drawing a cent from it. So yeah, I think you're a shark in here with the Sharks, personally.
Anyone else? It's your last chance.
John, I joined late here. Jonathan, thank you for your time and your talent. And you hit so many points, and that's part of the reason why I jumped on here late in the sense that I have an accounting degree, but I funded the accounting degree doing art and calligraphy. And so my profs were often kind of freaked out playing that whole right brain, left brain type stuff. And I went into a financial services, like you said, the accountants are great photographers. That's how they do their day job. But I missed my that creative passion part of it. And so for me, it's birds, but photography now is a business, and it's photographing people, places, and events. And I'm in a new city and trying to make things work. And it's tough. It's very tough when you don't know anybody here. But
John, what type of calligraphy did you do?
I developed a computerized process, so I gave you the look and feel of hand calligraphy without the time and expense, and so that's how I justified.
It's just interesting because my wife's background is in financial planning, and now she's doing Japanese calligraphy.
Oh, with the brush and everything?
Yes.
Beautiful stuff, and it's getting the little tip of the brush to move correctly.
Yep, exactly.
Oh yeah, it's fun. It's fun stuff.
And welcome, Eva. As we're about to finish here, Eva shows up to join us.
But it's been fun. Thank you so much for all the touch points. I look forward to go back and breaking this down and tearing it apart. And I hope you're open to taking random questions from.
I'm all random questions are the crux of my existence. So anytime, please.
I appreciate that. John,
appreciate
again,
you.
kudos to you for putting this on
Sure.
and bringing on stellar talent.
You're welcome.
It's been
Hey, Eva, you can unmute. Say something to us. I can't hear you. You're muted. Unmute your computer.
Johnny, I don't have a question. I just want to let you, my brother, that you're fucking awesome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, brother.
There,
That means a
now
lot
Eva
to
can
me.
talk to us.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Nice jacket.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Love your style. Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Eva, do you have any questions for Johnny? We're almost finished here, so.
Sorry for get so late. I was like engaged in the morning. So
You-
no, I only want to congratulate you in your starring career, Johnny. I follow you and you are fantastic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Eva. It means a lot to
Yeah.
me. Seriously.
I'm looking forward to working with you when you come in
Likewise.
close to Seattle.
Deal. Oh, that's going to be happening. I will keep you in the loop of that. We'll make some magic.
We'll have
There's
a
no
big
doubt.
event here.
You know,
Yes.
you have my studio if you need it.
I need it.
And
I need it
open
all the
for
time.
collaboration with everybody.
I need it every day of the year. So I'm going to take you up on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, last words, Johnny?
No, I really appreciate all of you being here. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing for me. I love art. I love to talk art. I love to create art. But ultimately, if there was no one in the world, you know, I don't know that I would want to create art. I mean, I talk about creating for myself, but I also create for others. And without others, there is nothing for me. So I just really appreciate all of you being here and, you know, the questions and the support. And I just encourage you on all of your own respective journeys. You know, we're all trying to get to some place. And I personally believe that as a community and collective of artists, when one of us succeeds, all of us succeed. So let's keep bolstering and supporting one another, and let's keep moving forward individually and collectively. And yeah, I'm just so excited to see where everyone goes with their respective art forms and to keep this conversation open moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you. I think this has been one of the deepest conversations we've had here. A lot of great topics came up. And I'm looking forward to next week, where my guest on Monday is going to be Lisa Carney, who you may know is a Photoshop expert and
That's
really,
what's up.
really entertaining lady to be around.
Yeah,
And
Lisa's
then-
amazing.
Yeah, and then on Thursday is going to be Kim and Zach Weston. Kim Weston is Edward Weston's grandson, and his son Zach continuing the Weston legacy, and we're going to talk about that on Thursday. So I hope you all can join us.
Brilliant. I will definitely be here.
Good. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I hope all of you have a wonderful day or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
very much.